A cruel daughter-in-law turns her now completely blind mother-in-law into an object of humiliation, using her as a table support at her lavish parties, unaware that the sheik, disguised as a gardener, observes every atrocity before his explosion of fury. Nora's marble and gold mansion shimmered under the nightlights, a beacon of ostentation that drew the city's elite to yet another of her extravagant parties. Crystal laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses filled the air, mingling with the soft melody of a string quartet. In the center of the main hall, beneath a crystal chandelier that cascaded light, was the evening's centerpiece, the mother-in-law. Seated on a low stool, her back hunched and her eyes opaque and fixed, the mother-in-law served as the base for a small glass coffee table. Upon it rested trays of delicate canapes and colorful cocktail glasses. Her wrinkled skin and trembling hands, barely able to maintain her posture, were a painful contrast to the surrounding opulence. Some guests cast curious glances, others looked away uncomfortably, but most simply ignored the pathetic figure, engrossed in conversation and drink. Nora, dazzling in an emerald dress that accentuated her slender figure, circulated among the guests with a radiant smile, but her eyes, cold and calculating, never lost sight of the mother-in-law. "A little more caviar, darling?" she asked, with forced sweetness, leaning over the mother-in-law to pick up a snack. "Don't worry, Mama. You're being so useful tonight. I don't know what I'd do without your support." The last word was uttered with a subtle venom that only the mother-in-law, in her darkness, could feel. An almost imperceptible tremor ran through the older woman's body, but she remained motionless, her dignity silently wounded. Outside, amidst the shadows of the jasmine bushes and palm trees that adorned the meticulously kept gardens, Omar, the new gardener, watched. His calloused hands held a rake, but his eyes, once full of warmth and authority, now burned with a mixture of disbelief and horror. He had arrived a week ago, an ordinary man in work clothes, with an unshaven beard and a straw hat that hid his face. No one had recognized him, and now he saw the woman who was once his wife, the mother of his son, reduced to a piece of furniture. He saw the daughter-in-law he had welcomed into his family, to whom he had given every luxury and trust, turning the house into a stage for her cruelty. Every laugh from Nora, every condescending glance from the guests, every tremor from the mother-in-law, was a stab to the heart of the disguised sheik. He felt his blood boil in his veins, an ancestral primal rage bubbling in his chest. The image of the mother-in-law, blind and humiliated, was unbearable. A group of guests approached the mother-in-law's table. "What an original idea, Nora," exclaimed a woman, laughing. "Your mother-in-law is truly versatile." Nora smiled, a wicked glint in her eyes. "Oh yes, she always loved being the center of attention, didn't she, Mama?" She pinched the mother-in-law's arm, a gesture that seemed playful to others but was silent torture. It was enough. The sheik, or Omar, could bear it no longer. A guttural roar escaped his lips, muffled by the sound of the party, but powerful enough to make the birds in the trees take flight. He dropped the rake and, with a strength that seemed to come from another world, grabbed a heavy pickaxe, leaning against the garage wall. His eyes were fixed on something. Not the mansion, not the people, but the most expensive and gleaming car parked in front of the house, Nora's new Rolls-Royce. With a cry of fury that echoed into the night, he lunged at the vehicle. The first blow of the pickaxe struck the windshield with the force of lightning, shattering the glass into 1,000 pieces that glittered like black diamonds under the party lights. The sound was deafening, instantly silencing the music and conversations. A second blow dented the hood, a third tore open the side of the door, exposing twisted metal. He continued, blow after blow, with savage intensity, destroying the car as if dismantling the very cruelty he had witnessed. Inside the mansion, silence fell like a guillotine. All eyes turned to the source of the deafening noise. Nora, who was about to pick up another canapé, froze. Her eyes followed those of the guests outside to the garden. She saw the gardener, Omar, with the pickaxe raised, his body trembling with rage. The Rolls-Royce transformed into an unrecognizable carcass. For an instant, she felt only confusion, then anger at the destruction of her property. But then, her eyes met his. Behind the beard and simple clothes, she saw a familiar glint, a fury she knew well, an authority she had feared and respected. The SHEIK, he was there, and he had seen her. A cold, paralyzing terror struck her, more potent than any pickaxe blow. The caviar fell from her hand, and the champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. She felt her blood run cold in her veins, her breath caught in her throat. He knew. He had seen everything. And now, she was lost. Paralyzing terror struck her, more potent than any pickaxe blow. He knew. He had seen everything. The silence in the mansion was so dense it could almost be touched. The guests, once so noisy and carefree, now seemed like wax statues, their faces frozen in expressions of shock and confusion. Some whispers began to emerge, but they were quickly muffled by the sound of the wind that seemed to howl around the house, or perhaps it was just the echo of the SHEIK's fury. Nora couldn't tear her gaze away from the man in the garden. The unshaven beard, the simple gardener's clothes, the straw hat discarded on the ground beside the pickaxe, all of it dissolved before her eyes, revealing the imposing and feared figure of her father-in-law. The SHEIK, the one she had thought to be thousands of miles away, oblivious to her machinations, was there, a witness to her cruelty. The glint in his eyes was not that of a gardener furious with a car, but of a betrayed king, an outraged patriarch. Her heart pounded erratically, a drum of panic in her chest. Nora's legs trembled, threatening to give way. She had built her small empire of humiliation and luxury on his absence, on the assumption that she would never be caught. The arrogance that propelled her now turned to ashes in her mouth. Every laugh, every mockery directed at the mother-in-law, every moment of sadistic pleasure she had felt seeing the older woman cower, all of it returned to haunt her, amplified by the SHEIK's presence. Outside, Omar the SHEIK did not stop. He dropped the pickaxe, which fell with a dull thud onto the grass, and began to walk. His steps were slow, deliberate, each one a hammer striking Nora's chest. He did not look at the destroyed car, nor at the terrified guests. His eyes were fixed on her, and his gaze was of an intensity that burned, promising a retribution Nora knew to be inevitable and terrible. One of the guests, a corpulent and visibly intoxicated man, tried to approach the door, mumbling something about calling the police. But the SHEIK merely raised his hand, a subtle gesture, yet imbued with such innate authority that the man stopped, paralyzed. No one dared to move. The once festive atmosphere was now charged with palpable fear. The mother-in-law, seated on her stool, felt the drastic change in the atmosphere. The clinking of glasses had ceased. The laughter had died. A heavy, oppressive silence hung in the air, unlike any silence she had ever experienced. She felt Nora's absence beside her. The hand that once pinched her was no longer there. A tremor ran through her body, but it was not of fear, but of a strange expectation. Something had changed. Something big. The SHEIK continued his relentless march. He passed through the main door, ignoring the guests who cowered as he went by. His eyes never left Nora's. With each step, the distance between them diminished, and the reality of the situation became sharper, more brutal for Nora. She was no longer the powerful hostess, the woman who controlled everything. She was prey, cornered, and the predator had arrived. Omar, Nora managed to whisper, the name barely escaping her dry lips. It was a plea, a desperate attempt to deny the truth, to perhaps soften the fury she saw in his eyes. But the sheik did not respond. He was just a few feet from her now, his imposing figure casting a dark shadow over the Persian rug. He stopped. His eyes, once filled with destructive fury, now gleamed with a calculating coldness that was even more terrifying. He needed no words. His gaze said it all. The party was over, and the judgment was about to begin. Nora felt a knot in her throat, the air thin. She stood before her judge, and the sentence she knew would be merciless. The sheik. No one dared to move. Something had changed. Something big. He stopped. His gaze said it all. The party was over. All of you, the sheik's voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the room, cutting the silence like a sharp blade. It was not the tone of the gardener, but the unquestionable authority of the man who governed an empire. Out. Now. The guests, as if awakened from a trance, began to move. Panic was evident on their faces as they stumbled over each other, rushing for the exit. No one dared to question, no one dared to look back. They were merely unwanted witnesses to a family drama that had transformed into something much larger and more dangerous. In a few minutes, the mansion, once filled with laughter and music, was empty, save for the three of them. Nora, still paralyzed, watched the last guests disappear through the door. Shame hit her with the force of a punch. Her reputation, her status, everything she had built, crumbled before her eyes. But fear was greater than shame. The sheik slowly turned to Nora, his eyes fixed on her, without a hint of emotion, only a cold and relentless determination. He then shifted his gaze to the mother-in-law, who remained motionless, a fragile and silent figure in the center of the hall. The sheik's expression softened for an instant, a deep pain crossing his eyes, before hardening again as he turned back to Nora. You. His voice was a dangerous whisper, more menacing than any shout. You turned my house into a circus, my wife, the mother of my son, into an object of scorn. Nora tried to speak, her vocal cords seemingly tied. I can explain, Omar. It's not what it looks like. The sheik took a step forward, and Nora instinctively recoiled. Not what it looks like? He laughed, a humorless laugh, full of contempt. I saw, Nora. I saw every glance, every fake smile, every cruel touch. I thought you were family. I thought you had a heart. He pointed to the mother-in-law with a gesture that was both accusatory and deeply sad. She is blind, Nora. Blind. And you used her darkness for your own sick amusement. The sheik's words were like whips, each one tearing Nora's facade. She felt tears well up, not from remorse, but from pure desperation and fear of the consequences. Please, Omar. I was under pressure. I didn't know what I was doing. Didn't know? The sheik moved even closer, his imposing figure towering over her. You knew exactly what you were doing, and now you will reap what you sow. The mother-in-law, feeling the palpable tension in the air, raised her head slightly. Her opaque eyes seemed for an instant to fix on Nora, as if she could see her through the darkness. A faint, almost imperceptible smile curved her wrinkled lips. Justice, she felt, had finally arrived. You will reap what you sow, the sheik repeated, his voice lower now, but with an intensity that chilled Nora's blood. He did not raise his voice, did not gesticulate with fury. He merely watched her, and that gaze was more devastating than any outburst. Nora felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Omar, please, I'm not that person. You know me. I love your son. I love this family. It was a moment of weakness. A bad joke, I swear. The words tumbled out desperate, but sounded hollow even to herself. She tried to approach, to reach out, but the sheik recoiled a step, as if her presence was repugnant. A bad joke? The coldness in his voice was cutting. You turned the mother of my son into a piece of furniture, Nora. You humiliated her before your guests, before me, who was disguised. Observing every act of your cruelty, he paused, the heavy silence filling the space. You are not family. You are a parasite who fed on the kindness and trust given to you. Nora felt a shiver run down her spine. The facade of power and control she maintained crumbled into pieces. She looked at the mother-in-law, who remained seated, motionless, but with a stillness that seemed filled with silent expectation. That faint smile on the blind woman's wrinkled lips was a dagger to Nora's heart. I regret it, Nora stammered, tears finally streaming down her face, not from genuine remorse, but from pure panic. I'll do anything to fix this. Please don't tell my husband. He'll leave me. The sheikh let out a bitter laugh. Your husband? Do you think he won't know? Do you think the truth can be hidden under the Persian rug, like your filthy secrets? He turned slightly, addressing the mother-in-law, his voice softening minimally, but still imbued with an unshakable authority. My beloved wife, you have been too patient, but your patience will no longer be tested. He then turned his gaze back to Nora, and the coldness returned more intense than before. You will not do anything to fix this, Nora. You will do as I command, and you will start now. Nora swallowed hard, her heart pounding erratically. What? What do you want me to do? First, the sheikh began, his voice low and controlled, you will kneel before my wife. You will ask for forgiveness for every humiliation, for every cruel word, for every disrespectful touch, and you will do it with sincerity, or I swear you will wish you had never been born. Nora hesitated. Kneel before that woman she so despised? Her pride screamed in protest, but the terror in her eyes was stronger. She looked at the sheikh, who watched her with deadly patience. She knelt slowly, her legs trembling, her dignity crushed. I'm so sorry, she murmured, her voice choked, looking at the mother-in-law's wrinkled hands. I'm so sorry for everything. Please, forgive me. The mother-in-law remained silent for a long moment, her head slightly tilted, as if listening not only to the words, but to Nora's soul. The faint smile on her lips deepened. She said nothing, but the absence of a response was, in itself, a condemnation. The sheikh watched the scene, his eyes fixed on Nora. This is just the beginning, he said, his voice a menacing whisper. From today, Nora, you are no longer the lady of this house. You are no longer my daughter-in-law. You are nothing. The words struck Nora like lightning. Nothing. She, who had always prided herself on her position, on her power, was now reduced to nothing. The paralyzing terror she had felt in the garden returned, stronger, more suffocating. She knew the sheikh's retribution would not be swift, nor simple. It would be slow, painful, and relentless, and she had nowhere to run. Nora remained kneeling, the sheikh's words echoing in her mind like a death knell. You are nothing. The cold floor beneath her knees seemed to drain the last vestiges of her strength and dignity. She raised her tear-filled eyes to the sheikh, who watched her with an expression that left no room for doubt. There was no explosive rage now, only a calculating coldness that promised a particular, meticulously planned hell. Get up, he ordered, his voice low but with the force of thunder. Nora obeyed, her legs shaky, feeling like a puppet whose strings were controlled by an invisible and relentless hand. Now, you will take my wife from that stool, carefully, and you will take her to her room. Nora hesitated for an instant. To touch the mother-in-law, whom she had treated with such contempt, now with reverence. It was a subtle torture, a cruel inversion of roles. But the sheikh's gaze was an invisible whip, and she felt the sting. She approached the mother-in-law, who remained motionless, her head held high, the faint smile still present on her wrinkled lips, as if savoring every second of that moment. Nora extended her trembling hands and with forced delicacy helped the mother-in-law to stand. The blind woman seemed surprisingly light in her arms, a fragility Nora had never noticed before, or perhaps never cared to notice. "Carefully," the sheik repeated, his voice a constant reminder of the vigilance that surrounded her. Nora guided the mother-in-law through the hall, each step a public humiliation, even if there was no one else to witness it but them. She could feel the weight of the sheik's gaze on her back, a constant pressure. Upon reaching the mother-in-law's bedroom door, Nora helped her sit on the edge of the bed, the blind woman's opaque eyes seeming to fix on her. Are you all right?" Nora murmured, the words sounding strange in her own ears, an echo of a concern she did not feel. The mother-in-law did not respond, merely tilted her head slightly, as if listening not only to the words, but to Nora's accelerated heartbeat, the melody of her panic. A heavy silence filled the room, more eloquent than any answer. Nora returned to the hall, where the sheik awaited her, arms crossed, a statue of judgment. The atmosphere was dense, charged with a somber expectation. "Now," the sheik began, his voice resuming the icy tone that made her tremble, "you will clean every trace of this party, every glass, every plate, every crumb, and you will do it alone, without help, without servants. You are solely responsible for this mess, and you will be the only one to clean it." Nora felt a shock run through her body. Clean. She, the lady of the house, the hostess of opulent parties, reduced to a servant. Her pride writhed in agony, but fear was a cruel and relentless master. But the servants," she tried to argue, her voice weak and almost inaudible. "The servants are dismissed," the sheik interrupted her, without a hint of emotion. "They will not be accomplices to your shame. You will do this, and you will do it now, and when you are finished, you will come to me." He sat in one of the ornate armchairs, crossing his legs, watching her with an intensity that made her want to disappear. The mother-in-law, who had returned to the hall, guided by an inexplicable instinct, sat down again on her stool, as if she were a silent spectator to a spectacle she had long awaited. Nora felt tears stream down again, hot and bitter. The humiliation was unbearable. She looked at the table, still laden with food scraps, empty glasses, dirty napkins. The grandeur of the party now seemed a cruel mockery of her own downfall. With trembling hands, she began to collect the glasses, the clinking of glass breaking the oppressive silence. Every movement was a reminder of her degradation. She could feel the sheik's eyes on her, the presence of the mother-in-law, a silent and victorious shadow. "And don't think of running away," the sheik said, as if reading her innermost thoughts. "This mansion has more eyes than you imagine, and I have more patience than you can conceive. Your punishment will be slow, Nora, and each day will be a reminder of what you did." Nora swallowed hard. The idea of fleeing had crossed her mind, a desperate flicker of hope. But the sheik's words crushed her. She was trapped in her own home, under the relentless gaze of her judge and the silent satisfaction of her victim. She continued to clean, each plate, each glass, each crumb becoming an unbearable burden. The hall, once the stage of her glory, was now the scene of her degradation. The night would be long, and dawn, she knew, would bring only more torment. The sheik was not finished with her, far from it. He was just beginning. Nora continued to clean, each plate, each glass, each crumb becoming an unbearable burden. Far from it. With trembling hands, Nora collected the crystal glasses, the clinking of glass breaking the oppressive silence. She could feel the sheik's eyes on her, a constant, heavy presence that made her break into a cold sweat. The mother-in-law, seated on her stool, seemed like a wax statue, but Nora knew that behind the blindness there was a sharp mind and deep satisfaction. The faint smile on the woman's wrinkled lips was a silent torment, a mirror of the victory Nora had never imagined witnessing. "More carefully, Nora," the sheik's voice cut through the air, low but sharp as a blade. She'd almost dropped a porcelain plate. Nora's heart leapt. He didn't miss a single detail. "Every piece of this house has value, a value you never knew how to appreciate." The words were a whip. Nora, who had always delegated household tasks to a legion of servants, now found herself bent over, scrubbing red wine stains from a Persian rug with a damp cloth. Her knees ached, her back protested, and her nails, always impeccable, were dirty and brittle. The irony was cruel. She, who considered herself the queen of that mansion, was now its humblest servant. Tears of rage and humiliation streamed down her face, mixing with sweat. She thought of her husband, Omar. What would he do? He loved her, she was sure. But the sheik. The sheikh was the patriarch, the supreme power. If he decided, Omar would have no choice but to obey. The idea of losing Omar, of being expelled from that life of luxury, was an even greater terror than the present humiliation. "Are you thinking about your future, Nora?" The sheik's voice was almost a whisper, but it resonated in her ears like a scream. "Don't worry. I've already planned it for you, every detail." Nora trembled. He read her thoughts. It was as if she were caught in an invisible web, and every move she made only entangled her further. She continued to clean methodically, every stain, every crumb. Time seemed to drag, the hours stretching into an eternity of punishment. The hall, little by little, began to regain its shine. But the sparkle in Nora's eyes had faded. When the last vestige of the party was removed, the glasses washed and put away, the dishes stacked in the kitchen, and the floor gleaming, Nora felt an overwhelming fatigue. She turned to the sheik, who was still seated, watching her with the same cold intensity. The mother-in-law beside him seemed to have fallen asleep, but Nora was not fooled. She felt the woman's presence, the aura of triumph that surrounded her. "I'm finished," Nora murmured, her voice hoarse, almost inaudible. The sheik slowly rose, his imposing figure filling the space. He walked to the table, running his fingertip over the polished surface. There was no dust. He nodded, an almost imperceptible movement. "Good. Now, come with me." Nora felt a new shiver. Where would he take her? What would come next? She followed him down the corridor, each step echoing in the silence of the mansion. He led her not to the master bedroom, hers and Omar's, but to a small guest room at the back of the house, a room she rarely used, reserved for less important visitors. "This will be your room starting today," the sheik announced, opening the door. The room was simple, with a small bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the back of the garden, far from the view of the pool and luxurious terraces. "Your belongings will be brought here. You no longer have access to the master bedroom." Nora felt the blow. Her sanctuary, her personal space taken from her. It was another layer of her identity being stripped away. "But my husband," she began, her voice choked. "Your husband will decide where he sleeps." The sheik interrupted her, his voice unshakable. "But you, Nora, will sleep here, and you will wake early. Tomorrow at sunrise you will be in the garden, where I found you." Nora swallowed hard. The garden, where she had been caught, where the sheik had revealed his fury, where the mother-in-law had been humiliated. "You will take care of the garden, Nora," he continued, his voice cold and relentless. "Every plant, every flower, every leaf, you will water, prune, pull weeds. You will work under the sun as I worked, and you will do it every day until I decide otherwise." Shock paralyzed Nora. A gardener, she... The idea was absurd, humiliating. But the sheik's gaze left no room for protest. He was transforming her into what she most despised, into what she had used to cover up her cruelty. "And don't think of trying to run away again," the sheik said, as if reading her thoughts. He closed the guest room door, leaving Nora alone in the dim light. The silence was overwhelming, filled only by the sound of her own ragged breath. She was trapped, far from it, and the garden she knew would be her new personal hell. Nora remained motionless in the small guest room, the smell of mold and dust suffocating her. The sheik's words echoed in her mind, each one a nail hammered into her coffin of luxury. Her room, her sanctuary, her husband. Everything was being torn from her piece by piece. She looked around the Spartan room, a single bed with a thin mattress, a cheap wooden dresser, a window overlooking a neglected corner of the garden where weeds grew freely. There was no large mirror, no marble vanity, no soft Persian rug under her feet, just the cold, bare floor. A wave of fury and despair hit her. How could he do this? She was the lady of the house, Omar's wife, but the sheik's cold voice, the way he had destroyed the car, the terror that had paralyzed her, all reminded her of the brutal reality. He was the sheik, he was the law, and she was at his mercy. The night was torture. Nora tried to sleep, but the hard mattress and the absence of familiar comfort kept her awake. Every creak of the house, every shadow on the wall seemed a reminder of her new prison. Tears, which she thought she had exhausted, began to flow again, hot and silent. She clung to the pillow, wishing Omar were there to protect her, to intercede for her. But he wasn't. And even if he were, she knew the sheik wouldn't listen. When the first pale rays of sun filtered through the window, Nora felt a chill. Dawn. The beginning of her new life. She got up, her body aching from the mattress and the night of crying. There were no designer clothes waiting for her, just a simple cotton outfit that seemed to have been left there by some forgotten guest. She put it on, feeling the roughness of the fabric against her skin. Upon leaving the room, the mansion seemed different. The silence was heavier, the walls taller, the corridors longer. She descended the stairs, feeling like an intruder in her own home. The sheik awaited her at the back door, dressed in his gardener's clothes, gloved hands and a straw hat on his head. His eyes, however, held no trace of disguise. They were the eyes of the judge. "Good morning, Nora," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "The sun is already high. The garden awaits." Nora did not respond. She merely followed him outside, into the fresh morning air. The garden, once a scene of leisure and beauty, now presented itself as a battlefield. Gardening tools were laid out on a rustic table, spades, rakes, pruning shears, thick gloves. "You will start with the rose bushes," the sheik instructed, pointing to a flower bed Nora had barely noticed before. "They need pruning and fertilizer, then the weeds, every single one of them, and don't forget to water." He handed her a pair of gloves and pruning shears. The gloves were rough and stained with earth. Nora put them on, feeling immediate repulsion. Her hands, always soft and well manicured, were now about to be disfigured. I don't know how to do this," she murmured, her voice choked. The sheik looked at her with an arched eyebrow. "You will learn, just as I learned. Nature is a patient, but demanding teacher, and I will be your supervisor." He sat on a nearby stone bench, watching her with the same cold intensity that had tormented her the previous night. Nora felt the warmth of the sun on her skin, the smell of damp earth. She picked up the shears, hesitant. The rose bushes seemed menacing, their thorns sharp. She had never touched a plant in her life, except to admire its flowers in a vase. With trembling hands, she began to prune, not knowing what she was doing. A thorn scratched her finger, and a drop of blood welled up, red against her pale skin. Nora felt a pang of pain and anger. It was just the beginning. The sheik was just beginning, and the garden she knew would be her new personal hell, a constant reminder of her downfall. Her room, Her sanctuary, her husband, just the cold, bare floor. Omar's wife, he was the law, and she was at his mercy. The night was torture, but he wasn't there. Dawn. The sun is already high, the garden awaits. Nora did not respond, every single one of them. And don't forget to water. He handed her a pair of gloves and pruning shears. You will learn, just as I learned, and I will be your supervisor. He sat on a nearby stone bench, watching her with the same cold intensity that had tormented her the previous night. It was just the beginning. The hours dragged on under the merciless sun. Nora tried to follow the Sheikh's vague instructions, but every cut seemed wrong, every movement clumsy. The rose thorns pierced the rough gloves, scratching her skin, leaving small, burning wounds. That's not how you prune, Nora. The Sheikh's voice cut through the air, cold and precise. He approached, took the shears from her trembling hands, and demonstrated a clean, decisive cut. You need to remove the dead branches so the new ones can flourish. It's about life and death, Nora. Something you seem to understand very well. The words were a blow. Nora felt her face flush, not just from the sun, but from humiliation. He was referring to the mother-in-law she knew, to the way she had tried to stifle the old woman's life. She took the shears back, her hands even more trembling. With each branch cut, each leaf torn, she felt a mixture of rage and despair. Her muscles ached, her back protested, and the thirst was unbearable. She looked at the sheik, who had returned to his stone bench, watching her with a patience that seemed infinite. It was psychological torture, a cat-and-mouse game where she was the prey. "I can't take it anymore," she murmured to herself, her eyes burning. "I wasn't made for this." But the image of the sheik destroying the car, the fury in his eyes, paralyzed her. She couldn't stop. She couldn't defy him. She couldn't run away. The afternoon advanced and the sun seemed to burn even hotter. Nora moved on to the weeds, kneeling in the damp earth. Dirt caked under her nails, and the smell of earth and plants invaded her nostrils. She, who had always been terrified of getting her hands dirty, was now immersed in the filth of the garden. Each weed pulled seemed like a piece of her old life being forcibly torn away. "Are you thinking about your life of luxury, Nora?" the sheikh asked, as if he had read her thoughts. "About the comfort you despised? About the beauty you stained with your cruelty?" Nora did not respond, merely continued to pull the weeds with a silent fury, tears mixed with sweat and dirt on her face. She hated the sheik. She hated the mother-in-law. She hated that garden. But above all, she hated herself for having been caught, for having underestimated the power and cruelty of the man who now controlled her. When the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, Nora was exhausted. Her entire body ached, her hands were raw, and her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She stood up, swaying, and looked at the sheik. "I'm finished," she said, her voice hoarse and broken. He stood up, walked to her, and inspected the work. There was no smile, no sign of approval, only the same cold, relentless gaze. "You did the bare minimum, Nora," he said, "but it's a start. Tomorrow at sunrise, you will be here again, and there will be much more to be done." He turned and walked back to the mansion, leaving her alone in the garden that was now her personal purgatory. Nora looked at her dirty, wounded hands, at the setting sun, and at the shadows that began to swallow the garden. Far from it. The night that followed was an even greater torment than the day. Nora stumbled back to the small room, her body throbbing in every muscle, her hands raw, burning with every movement. The smell of earth and sweat permeated her clothes and skin, a constant reminder of her new reality. There was no hot bath to ease the pain, only a basin of cold water and harsh soap. Every drop of water on her wounds was a pang of agony. She lay down on the thin mattress, but sleep did not come. The physical pain was unbearable, but the emotional pain was even worse. The humiliation, the rage, the despair. She tossed and turned, trying to find a comfortable position, but every part of her body protested. The Sheik's words echoed in her mind. "You did the bare minimum, Nora." The minimum. She had worked to exhaustion, and for him, it was nothing. Nora closed her eyes, and images of the mother-in-law, seated at the table with blind eyes and an empty smile, invaded her thoughts. The parties, the guests' laughter, the bubbling champagne. Everything seemed so distant, so unreal now. She clung to the pillow, hot tears streaming again. She hated the Sheik for this. She hated the mother-in-law for being the cause of it all. And she hated herself for having been so careless, so arrogant. Deep down, a cold fear gnawed at her. The Sheik was not just punishing her. He was breaking her. He was dismantling her identity, her life, piece by piece. The destruction of the car, the fury in his eyes, was a promise that he would not stop until she was unrecognizable. Dawn. She got up, her body aching, but with a cold determination. It was not a determination to fight, but to survive. She put on the same simple cotton outfit, feeling the roughness of the fabric against her skin. Upon leaving the room, the mansion seemed even quieter, more oppressive. She descended the stairs, feeling like a prisoner in her own home. The sheikh awaited her at the back door, already dressed in his gardener's clothes, gloved hands and straw hat. His eyes, however, held no trace of disguise. They were the eyes of the judge, and today they seemed even more severe. "Good morning, Nora," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, but with an edge of steel that made her shiver. "The sun is already high. The garden awaits." Nora did not respond. She merely followed him outside, into the fresh morning air, which to her smelled of condemnation. The gardening tools were laid out on a rustic table, the same ones from yesterday. "Today, Nora, you will not only tend to the rose bushes," the sheik instructed, pointing to a flower bed Nora had barely noticed before. It was the main flower bed, where the most exuberant roses bloomed, those she used to display in her vases at parties. "You will clean every dry leaf, every fallen petal, and then—" He paused dramatically, his eyes fixed on hers. "You will prepare the soil for new seeds, seeds of flowers the mother-in-law always loved, but which have been neglected for too long." Her hands, always soft and well manicured, were now about to be disfigured again. I don't know which flowers she loved," Nora murmured, her voice choked. "You will learn, just as I learned. It was just the beginning, something you seem to understand very well." The words were a blow. "I wasn't made for this." But the image of the sheik destroying the car, the fury in his eyes, paralyzed her. She couldn't stop. She couldn't defy him. She couldn't run away. "The beauty you stained with your cruelty?" Nora did not respond, merely continued to pull the weeds with a silent fury. She hated the sheik. She hated the mother-in-law. She hated that garden. But it's a start, and there will be much more to be done. He turned and walked back to the mansion, leaving her alone in the garden that was now her personal purgatory. Far from it. Nora dragged herself back to her room, but before she could close the door, the sheik's voice reached her, cold and cutting, coming from the main corridor. "Ah, and Nora," he said without turning, "tomorrow, besides the mother-in-law's flowers, you will also clean the pool area, the one where you used to serve champagne." A shiver ran down Nora's spine. He knew everything. He wasn't just punishing her. He was reliving each of her crimes, forcing her to confront the extent of her cruelty. The pool, where the blind mother-in-law was used as an object. Nora felt a paralyzing terror. The night was a blur of pain and nightmares. Nora tossed and turned on the thin mattress, every muscle protesting, every scratch on her hands burning like fire. The sheik's words, "Tomorrow, besides the mother-in-law's flowers, you will also clean the pool area, the one where you used to serve champagne," echoed in her mind. more terrifying than any physical pain. He knew everything. It wasn't a generic punishment, it was a meticulous retribution, a cruel mirror of her own actions. When the pale morning sun crept through the window, Nora felt no relief, only a new wave of dread. Her body was exhausted, but her mind was on high alert, anticipating the torture that awaited her. She dragged herself out of bed, put on the rough cotton clothes, and descended the stairs, the smell of weak coffee and stale bread hanging in the air. There was no longer the aroma of fresh croissants or the bustle of servants preparing a feast. The sheik awaited her at the back door, impassive as a statue. His eyes, which once gleamed with savage fury, were now cold and calculating, like those of a predator toying with its prey. "Good morning, Nora," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Today, the garden will have a rest from your hands. We have a new project." Nora merely nodded, unable to speak. She followed him, her heart pounding erratically as he led her not to the garden, but to the pool area. The place, once a stage for luxurious parties and carefree laughter, now seemed desolate under the morning light. The lounge chairs were empty, the coffee tables dusty, and the pool water, though clean, reflected a grey sky that seemed to presage more misfortune. "Here," the sheik instructed, pointing to a pile of buckets, brushes, and cleaning products. "You will clean every inch of this area, the pool edges, the tiles, the tables, the chairs, everything, and pay special attention to this table," he said, touching with the tip of his foot a round marble table strategically positioned near the pool's edge. It was the table where, on countless occasions, the mother-in-law had been seated, her blind eyes fixed on the void, while Nora and her guests toasted and laughed. Nora felt a knot in her throat. The table. She could almost hear the clinking of champagne glasses, the mocking laughter of the guests, the mother-in-law's voice fragile and confused. The humiliation she had inflicted upon the old woman now turned against her, a cruel echo. "Start with the pool edges," the sheik ordered, sitting on one of the lounge chairs, crossing his legs and watching her with the same cold intensity as always. "Make sure there isn't a single stain. Remember, cleaning is an act of purification, and you have much to purify, Nora." Nora picked up a brush and a bucket, feeling the weight of the sheik's gaze on her back. She knelt at the pool's edge, the cold water splashing on her already wounded hands. Every movement was a pang of pain, but the physical pain was insignificant compared to the psychological torture. As she scrubbed the tiles, images of the parties invaded her mind. She, dazzling in her expensive dresses, floating among the guests, the mother-in-law seated at the table, a living decoration piece, a trophy of her cruelty. "Do you remember how the champagne bubbled, Nora?" The sheik's voice cut the silence, making her start. "The laughter of your friends, the loud music that drowned out any trace of humanity." Nora did not respond, merely scrubbed harder, tears mixing with sweat and pool water. She could smell the chlorine, but in her mind it was the sweet, effervescent scent of champagne, the aroma of her own depravity. The hours dragged on. The sun rose, burning her exposed skin. Her back ached, her knees were raw from kneeling so much, and her hands, already raw, were now swollen and red. She cleaned the marble table, every movement a vivid reminder of her cruelty. She could almost see the mother-in-law sitting there, her eyes empty, her dignity stolen. "You found it amusing, didn't you, Nora?" the sheik asked, his voice soft but laden with venom. "Seeing the mother-in-law, so helpless, so vulnerable, you felt powerful, didn't you?" Nora dropped the brush, her body trembling. "No," she whispered, her voice choked. I didn't think. The sheik stood up, walked to her and knelt, his eyes fixed on hers. "You didn't think of her pain, her humiliation. You didn't think that one day perhaps someone would do the same to you? She felt a paralyzing terror. He was right. He was doing exactly that. He was breaking her piece by piece, using her own weapons against her. I'm so sorry, she managed to say, tears streaming freely now. I'm so sorry. The sheik remained impassive. Being sorry doesn't erase the past, Nora. It merely acknowledges it. Continue. The pool is not yet perfect. Nora picked up the brush again, despair taking hold of her. She scrubbed, cleaned, polished, until every surface shone. But the shine brought no satisfaction, only an even greater emptiness. When the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of red and gold, the pool area was impeccable. She stood up, her entire body protesting, and looked at the sheik. "I'm finished," she said, her voice a mere whisper. He inspected the work, his eyes scanning every detail. "Good," he said, without a trace of emotion. "Now, you may go, but tomorrow, Nora, we have a new project. The ballroom, the one where you danced and celebrated your cruelty. Another stage of her crimes. The sheik was not just punishing her, he was unearthing every memory, forcing her to relive every act of inhumanity. He was breaking her, not just physically, but her soul. And she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that he would not stop until nothing remained of who she once was. The ballroom. The darkness of the night brought with it a chorus of ghostly voices, echoes of the laughter and toasts that once filled the ballroom. Nora cowered on the mattress, her raw hands throbbing, her body exhausted but her mind in a whirlwind of dread. Every image of the opulent parties, where the mother-in-law was displayed as a macabre trophy, danced before her closed eyes. The sheik was not just punishing her, he was torturing her, turning her memories into weapons against her. When the first pale light of morning crept through the window, Nora was already awake, her stomach churning with anxiety. There was no longer the luxury of breakfast served in bed, nor the choice of a dazzling wardrobe, only the rough clothes and the certainty of more pain. She descended the stairs, each step an effort, and found the sheik already at the ballroom door, his figure imposing and impassive, like an executioner awaiting his victim. "Good morning, Nora," he said, his voice empty of emotion, but laden with a silent threat. "Your new project awaits you." Nora merely nodded, unable to utter a word. The ballroom, once a spectacle of opulence with its glittering crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors and sumptuous tapestries, now seemed a mausoleum of her own transgressions. The morning light revealed accumulated dust, shoe marks on the marble, and the melancholy of a stage that had witnessed so much cruelty. "Here," the sheik instructed, gesturing to a pile of buckets, brooms, cloths, and cleaning products. "You will clean every inch of this hall, the floors, the walls, the baseboards, and especially this stage." He pointed to the elevated stage in the center of the hall, where Nora, in her arrogance, had often positioned the mother-in-law so that everyone could see her, so that the humiliation would be maximal. Remember every dance step, every toast, every laugh that echoed here, while the mother-in-law was reduced to an object. The stage. She could almost hear the loud music, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of guests, and the mother-in-law sitting there, blind and helpless, a prop in her theater of cruelty. The humiliation she had inflicted upon the old woman now turned against her, a cruel and inescapable echo. "Start with the stage," the sheik ordered, sitting in one of the ornate armchairs, crossing his legs and watching her with the same cold intensity as always. Nora picked up a broom and a bucket, feeling the weight of the sheik's gaze on her back. She climbed onto the stage, the wood creaking beneath her feet. As she swept the dust, images of the parties invaded her mind. She, dazzling in her expensive dresses, floating among the guests, the mother-in-law seated on the stage, a living decoration piece, a trophy of her cruelty. "Do you remember how loud the music was, Nora?" The sheik's voice cut the silence, making her start. The laughter of your friends? The way you encourage them to mock her? Nora did not respond, merely swept harder, tears mixing with sweat and dust. She could smell the mold and dirt, but in her mind it was the sweet scent of expensive perfumes, the aroma of her own depravity. The hours dragged on. The sun rose, burning her exposed skin through the large windows. Her back ached, her knees were raw from kneeling so much to scrub the floor, and her hands, already raw, were now swollen and red. She cleaned the stage, every movement a vivid reminder of her cruelty. Seeing the mother-in-law, so helpless, so vulnerable, exposed to everyone, Nora dropped the broom, her body trembling. I didn't think. Her humiliation. You didn't think that one day perhaps someone would do the same to you on this very stage. He was right. I'm so sorry for everything. It merely acknowledges it. Continue. The hall is not yet perfect. Nora picked up the broom again, despair taking hold of her. She swept, scrubbed, cleaned, polished, until every surface shone. When the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of red and gold, the ballroom was impeccable. Now you may go. The family chapel, the one where you made your vows of love and respect, and where the mother-in-law used to pray for you. The chapel, the most sacred place on the property. The sheik was not just punishing her, he was unearthing every memory, forcing her to relive every act of inhumanity, every broken promise. Your new project awaits you. Nora merely nodded, unable to utter a word. Remember every dance step, every toast, every laugh that echoed here while the mother-in-law was reduced to an object. Nora felt a shiver run down her spine. The stage. And you have much to purify, Nora. Nora picked up a broom and a bucket, feeling the weight of the sheik's gaze on her back. The laughter of your friends, the way you encourage them to mock her. Nora did not respond, merely swept harder, tears mixing with sweat and dust. The hours dragged on. You felt powerful, didn't you? Nora dropped the broom, her body trembling. I didn't think. Didn't think? The sheik stood up, walked to her, and knelt, his eyes fixed on hers. Her humiliation. You didn't think that one day, perhaps, someone would do the same to you on this very stage. The words struck Nora like lightning. He was right. I'm so sorry for everything. The sheik remained impassive. It merely acknowledges it. Continue. The hall is not yet perfect. Nora picked up the broom again, despair taking hold of her. Now you may go. The family chapel, the one where you made your vows of love and respect, and where the mother-in-law used to pray for you. Nora felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The chapel. The darkness of that night was even more oppressive. The chapel loomed in her mind like a chilling shadow. Nora tried to sleep, but each time she closed her eyes, she saw the altar, the sacred images, and the mother-in-law's face, so full of faith and hope on her wedding day. She remembered the vows she had uttered, the promises of love and respect that now seemed a cruel joke. Her hands and knees burned, but the physical pain was a mere nuisance compared to the agony of her conscience. When the sun rose, tinging the sky a pale grey, Nora was already standing, a tight knot in her stomach. There were no more tears to shed, only a numbing emptiness. She descended the stairs, her body stiff, and found the sheik at the chapel door, his figure imposing and silent, a relentless judge. "Good morning, Nora," he said, his voice monotonous, but with an echo that seemed to vibrate through the chapel walls. Nora couldn't even nod. The chapel, with its colourful stained-glass windows filtering the morning light into mystical patterns, the white marble altar and dark wooden pews, seemed a sanctuary untouched by time. But for Nora, It was a museum of her lies. Here, the sheik gestured to the buckets and cloths. You will clean every inch of this sacred place. The stained glass windows, the altar, the pews where the mother-in-law knelt to pray for you, and the floor where you walked to make your vows. Remember every word you said, every promise you broke. Nora felt a chill down her spine. The altar, she could almost feel the weight of the veil on her head, the sheik's proud gaze, the mother-in-law's trembling hand squeezing hers. She could hear the soft melody of the organ, the priest's words, and her own responses empty of sincerity. Start with the altar, Jules, the sheik ordered, sitting in the first pew, his eyes fixed on her. Cleaning is an act of redemption, Nora, and you have much to redeem. Nora picked up a cloth and a bucket, feeling the weight of the sheik's gaze. She approached the altar, the cold wood beneath her fingers. As she scrubbed the marble, images of the wedding invaded her mind. She, dazzling in her white dress, smiling at the sheik, while the mother-in-law beside her radiated happiness and faith. Do you remember how the mother-in-law prayed for you, Nora? The sheik's voice cut the silence, making her start. She asked God to bless your marriage, to give you happiness, and you, in return, turned her into an object of scorn. Nora did not respond, merely scrubbed harder, tears mixing with water and soap. She could smell the incense and wax, but in her mind, it was the sweet scent of wedding flowers, the aroma of her own hypocrisy. The hours dragged on. The sun moved through the stained glass windows, painting the floor with vibrant colors that Nora barely noticed. Her back ached. Her knees were raw from kneeling so much to scrub the pews, and her hands, already raw, were now swollen and red. She cleaned the altar, the pews, the stained glass windows, every movement a vivid reminder of her betrayal. She could almost see the mother-in-law sitting there, her eyes empty, her dignity stolen, her faith broken. Breaking your vows in this sacred place, using the mother-in-law's faith against her? Nora dropped the cloth, her body trembling. I didn't think. The humiliation you brought to this place where she sought solace. You didn't think that one day, perhaps, someone would do the same to you at this very altar. He was right. I'm so sorry for everything. It merely acknowledges it. Continue. The chapel is not yet perfect. Nora picked up the cloth again, despair taking hold of her, when the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of red and gold. The chapel was impeccable. Now, you may go. The mother-in-law's private garden, the one where she used to find peace and where you often ignored her or left her alone. A place of refuge for the old woman, which Nora had turned into yet another stage for her indifference. The sheik was not just punishing her, he was unearthing every memory, forcing her to relive every act of inhumanity, every moment of abandonment. The mother-in-law's private garden loomed in her mind like a verdant shadow, every flower and bush seeming to whisper accusations. Nora tried to sleep, but each time she closed her eyes, she saw the rose beds, the small pond with golden carp, and the mother-in-law's face, so serene and at peace in that refuge, a stark contrast to how Nora treated her. She remembered the times the mother-in-law had invited her to share the garden's beauty, and how Nora, with disdain, had refused, preferring the company of her friends and their frivolities. She descended the stairs, her body stiff, and found the sheik at the garden entrance, his figure imposing and silent, a relentless judge. "Good morning, Nora," he said, his voice monotonous, but with an echo that seemed to vibrate through the leaves of the trees. The garden, with its blooming flowers and birdsong, seemed an untouched paradise, but for Nora, it was a scene of her omissions. "Here," the sheik gestured to the gardening tools. "You will clean every inch of this place of peace, the weeds you allowed to grow, the flowers that withered from lack of care, the paths you avoided. Remember every time the mother-in-law called you to share a moment here and you ignored her. the garden. She could almost smell the perfume of the roses the mother-in-law loved so much, the warmth of the sun on her face as the old woman sat on her favorite bench, waiting for company that never came. She could hear the mother-in-law's soft voice, full of hope, and her own flimsy excuses, empty of sincerity. "Start with the weeds," the sheik ordered, sitting on the stone bench where the mother-in-law used to meditate, his eyes fixed on her. "Make sure there isn't a single one." Nora picked up a small spade and a glove, feeling the weight of the sheik's gaze. She approached the rosebed, the cold earth beneath her fingers. As she pulled the weeds, images of the past invaded her mind. She, in a hurry, averting her gaze from the mother-in-law in the garden, inventing non-existent commitments, while the old woman remained there, alone, her dignity silently corroded. "Do you remember how the mother-in-law found peace here, Nora?" The sheik's voice cut the silence, making her start. She asked God to give her serenity, to help her bear the loneliness you imposed on her. And you, in return, left her to languish, ignored in this, her own sanctuary. Nora did not respond, merely pulled the weeds harder, tears mixing with earth and sweat. She could smell the damp earth and flowers, but in her mind it was the smell of indifference, the aroma of her own cruelty. The hours dragged on. The sun moved across the sky, warming the garden with a golden light that Nora barely noticed. Her back ached, her knees were raw from kneeling so much to pull weeds, and her hands, already raw, were now swollen and red. She cleaned the flower beds, pruned the rose bushes, watered the flowers, every movement a vivid reminder of her neglect. She could almost see the mother-in-law sitting there, her eyes empty, her dignity stolen, her peace broken, leaving the mother-in-law alone in this place she loved so much, using her blindness as an excuse for your absence. Nora dropped the spade, her body trembling. I didn't think. The loneliness you brought to this place where she sought solace. You didn't think that one day, perhaps, someone would do the same to you in this very garden." He was right. I'm so sorry for everything. I abandoned her." "Being sorry doesn't make withered flowers bloom again, Nora. It merely acknowledges it. Continue. The garden is not yet perfect." Nora picked up the spade again, despair taking hold of her. She pulled, pruned, watered, cleaned, until every leaf and flower shone. When the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of red and gold, the garden was impeccable. "Now you may go." The mother-in-law's room, the one where she spent her most vulnerable days and where you left her to languish in solitude. The mother-in-law's room, the most intimate and personal place, where the old woman had faced her blindness and her loneliness. The mother-in-law's room loomed in her mind like a mausoleum of painful memories, every piece of furniture, every shadow seeming to whisper accusations. Nora tried to sleep, but each time she closed her eyes, she saw the bed where the mother-in-law spent hours, the bedside table with medicines and water that Nora had so often refused to reach, the window the mother-in-law couldn't see, but which Nora ignored. She remembered the times the mother-in-law had called her, her voice weak, asking for a glass of water, an adjustment to her pillow, or just a comforting word, and how Nora, with disdain, had invented excuses or simply pretended not to hear, preferring the company of her friends and their frivolities. Her hands, knees, and back ached, but the physical pain was a mere nuisance compared to the agony of her conscience. She descended the stairs, her body stiff, and found the sheik at the mother-in-law's bedroom door, his figure imposing and silent, a relentless judge. "Good morning, Nora," he said, his voice monotonous, but with an echo that seemed to vibrate through the corridor walls. "Your new project awaits you." This is the mother-in-law's most intimate sanctuary, the place where she faced her blindness, her loneliness, and her vulnerability, the place where you left her to languish. The room, with its heavy curtains and the dim light the sheik maintained, seemed a tomb. But for Nora, it was a scene of her cruelest omissions. "Here," the sheik gestured to the cleaning materials. "You will clean every inch of this place. The dust stains you allowed to accumulate, the objects you never bothered to arrange, the stagnant air you never took the trouble to refresh. Remember every time the mother-in-law called you for a moment here and you ignored her." The room. She could almost smell the scent of medicines and loneliness that hung in the air, the warmth of the mother-in-law's body in the bed, waiting for company that never came. "Start with the bed," the sheik ordered, sitting in the armchair by the window, his eyes fixed on her. "Change the sheets, air the mattress, make sure there isn't a single dust particle." Nora picked up the clean sheets and a cloth, feeling the weight of the sheik's gaze. She approached the bed, the cold wood beneath her fingers. As she changed the sheets, images of the past invaded her mind. She, in a hurry, averting her gaze from the mother-in-law in bed, inventing non-existent commitments, while the old woman remained there, alone, her dignity silently corroded. "Do you remember how the mother-in-law found solace here, Nora?" The sheik's voice cut the silence, making her start. "She asked God to give her strength, to help her bear the loneliness you imposed on her. And you, in return, left her to languish, ignored in this, her own refuge." Nora did not respond, merely cleaned the surfaces harder, tears mixing with sweat. She could smell the cleaning and disinfectant, but in her mind it was the smell of indifference, the aroma of her own cruelty. The hours dragged on. The sun moved across the sky, warming the room with a golden light that Nora barely noticed. Her back ached, her knees were raw from kneeling so much to clean the floor, and her hands, already raw, were now swollen and red. She cleaned the furniture, polished the objects, aired the room, every movement a vivid reminder of her neglect. Leaving the mother-in-law alone in this place she loved and needed so much? I didn't think. You didn't think that one day, perhaps, someone would do the same to you in this very room? He was right. I'm so sorry for everything. I abandoned her. I left her to die of loneliness. Being sorry doesn't bring the mother-in-law back, Nora. It merely acknowledges it. Continue. The room is not yet perfect. She cleaned, polished, aired until every surface shone. When the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of red and gold, the room was impeccable. You have cleaned the places you desecrated and neglected. You have been forced to relive every act of inhumanity, every moment of abandonment. But the stain on your soul, Nora, that you will have to carry alone. And your punishment, believe me, is only just beginning. He had broken her, not just physically, but her soul. But now the torment was not only physical, it was the certainty of endless punishment, a particular hell built with her own cruelties. She was trapped in her own web of malice, and the SHEIK was the herald of her eternal condemnation.